Hello. If you rummage about on this channel, you will find a few interviews and documentaries and features with people who have had an influence on me, people whose friendship I cherish, people whose wisdom has made a difference to me. And today I'm going to show you an interview with Les Sinclair. Les is 86. He's born in Australia, lives in Las Vegas, but he's had a tremendous impact on me in one way or the other over the years. And I wanted to have a chat with him to share some of that wisdom and to get him to talk about a few things that I was curious to ask more about. So enjoy Les Sinclair. Thank you for your following on this channel. Please like, subscribe, and you can send a donation if you want. There's a little link below. Thanks for being here.
Recording in progress.
So you heard the lady say recording in progress, and you just said, Les Sinclair, wonderful to see you in Las Vegas. You just said that connection is everything. And I think that's exactly why I had the impulse to ask you if you do a chat with me, record a chat with me. I'm incredibly fond of you. I love you to bits because we go back 20 years. But now you live in Las Vegas. You were much more in Europe a while back, but we don't get to hang out like we once did, and there were good reasons why we hung out. But I just had this impulse to connect with you a bit deeper than we might in a phone chat, just so that
I love it.
Because and this is really the only premise. The possibility always exists that some person will watch our conversation or listen to our discussion, and they may get something out of it. It might help them. And I think that's, who was it who said only connect? E.M. Forster or someone like that. But, we may, without meaning to, we may actually give someone a flash of insight or so that's why I wanted to do this. And I'm thrilled that you said yes.
Great. Yeah.
And we met because of the Mankind Project, which is something that we will, I'm sure, touch on.
Sure.
And you bear the wonderful surname Sinclair. Is it? Am I making this up, or do you have a historic ancestral connection to the Sinclairs, to the Knights Templar?
Well, I like to think so. Yeah, I like to think so. One time I came to stay with my pal John Davis, well, and I went up to Edinburgh because I wanted to go to Rosslyn Chapel. And Rosslyn Chapel was built by Sir William Sinclair, I believe, 15 something or other. And it was beautiful. And my brother, Don, in Australia, is a golfer, married to a Brit. And when she comes over to visit her sons in England and Portugal, he goes up there to play golf. He wants to hit that little white ball and, ruin his life. But he went to Rosslyn Chapel one day and he walked in and at the guest book and he said, "My name is Donald William Sinclair and I'm here to claim my heritage." And they said, "Fuck off, mate." Yeah. So anyway, I like to think that I have some sort of Viking, ancestral Scottish blood in me.
I wouldn't put it past you.
I'm fifth generation Australian. My mother's side is British. She was Butterworth, and my dad tells me, I don't know. We've tried to do an ancestral research, but what my father told me was that he's our great-great-grandfather, also Leslie Sinclair, Leslie George, I believe. I think it was something like that, or maybe George Leslie. He was not a convict sent to Australia. He was he was what do they call him? Like he was the second or third son of, of a family. And in those days in England, as you well know, the first son inherits everything, and the second and third go and join the Navy or the ministry or go somewhere.
Right.
So, and I think in Australia they call them jackaroos, people that free Brits that came to Australia. So yeah.
5 generations. So roughly when's that?
I don't know what year that would be. Yeah, there's a lot. Uh, do you remember Helen Reddy,
Yeah.
the singer? We were good pals. I mean, she being Aussie and working in show business. I used to work on a show called Password, and her manager called and said Helen Reddy would like to be a celebrity on the show, and I'm thinking, she's Australian. She won't know all this American stuff. And anyway, she came in and I sort of auditioned her, and she was quite good at playing the game. And she was one of our favorites, end up being a favorite celebrity guest. And she said to me one day, she says, Les, how many generations Australian are you? And I said, five. I'm 7 generations. And we have convicts on both sides of my family. So there. And I'm thinking, oh my God. Yeah,
Well, Aussies are nothing if not competitive.
that's right.
But you mentioned TV there. That was an Australian show, was it? The one with
No,
Helen.
no, no. This was in no, this was in the US. Yeah, I worked on a show called Password. It was quite well known here, and that what year would that have been? Like 74 or something like that, 72, and that ran for quite a while. But that no, that was in LA,
Uh-huh.
and it was a game show, you know.
But your work span, your experience is astonishing because you ended up very high levels of telly as a producer and so on in LA. But before that, you were a dancer. You were even involved in ballet. You were in musicals like me. You did plenty of musicals. It's something that you and I have in common is a love of theatre and performing. And
Yeah.
how
You
did you
you
get
did
into
you
that?
did My Fair Lady on the West End, didn't you?
I did. I played
Did
Professor.
you play Henry
I
Higgins?
played Professor Higgins at the Theatre Royal Drury
I
Lane.
love it. Well, I was in the chorus. That was my first job in Melbourne, Australia.
Hmm.
I'd been studying dance, and I'd only been studying, I guess, about 18 months, and I went for an audition, and next thing you know, I'm in the show. And it was a big hit. It ran for 2 years in Melbourne.
Wow.
2 years. Well, Australians love the theatre, particularly Melbourne. It's a very,
Sure.
very theatre town. So that sort of propelled me, to continue being a dancer.
But were
I
you
ended
were you athletic before dancing? Were you into sports and things as a youth?
Yeah, I did track and field, but unlike most Aussies, I didn't play Australian rules footy or cricket. I hated cricket because, I always thought, you know, cricket belongs in England in the summer when it's 70 degrees. In Australia, it's 100, you know. No, I come from an athletic, well, most Aussies are into sports. My mother was a good tennis player. And my two brothers did play football, and my sister, I just spoke to yesterday, she was a swimmer. So I do come from an athletic family, but
And you're still very fit now, aren't you?
I like to think so. I'm 86. I did my walk today. I'm doing chair yoga. I studied yoga. I was doing yoga for, oh, I've been doing it probably, I don't do like a full yoga class. I can't do that anymore. But I got involved with a little bit of story. It's working on a show, The Dinah Shore Show, which was a famous show, and I was a associate producer on the show. And one day I went to the executive producer. His name was Henry Jaffe. Henry Jaffe was he was Frank Sinatra's attorney and also Dinah Shore's, and he created AFTRA. Do you know AFTRA? American Federation of Television. And
Yeah.
so he said to me, he said, let's go home, see a chiropractor, and start doing yoga. And I'm thinking, what? What the hell is that? So my wife at the time, I said that to her. She said, yeah, let's go and do yoga together. Well, I absolutely loved it, and it saved my back, and I've been doing it forever. And it was akin to like when I was a dancer, all dancers have to be at the bar. You know, if you're a serious ballet dancer, you're at the bar every morning and the afternoon, and then the performance. So the discipline of having to do something physical every day, I've always done that and have enjoyed it. Even when I didn't want to do it, it was just part of my being that how I needed to operate.
But did you get grief for being attracted to dance from as an
Oh, when
adolescent?
I came home and I said to here's how it happened. I was dating a girl. She was about 4 or 5 years older than me. Francie, her name was. She was pretty cool. She had an MGA or MGT, a little MG anyway. And so I picked her up at ballet class one day, and I saw these guys dancing and you know doing two jetés en l'air, and I said, "Boy, that looks pretty good." She said, "Why don't you take a class?" And I said, "Okay." So I took a class, and the teacher said, "You're quite good." He wanted me as a student, of course, but he gave me a partial scholarship. So I did about 4 or 5 lessons, and I suddenly thought, yeah, I'm going to do this. And I said to my mother, "Hey, guess what, Mum? I'm going to be a dancer." "Don't tell your father, it'll kill him." Not those words, but that was the that was the energy. But to my father's credit, he said, "Son, if that's something you want to do it and be good at it."
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, but I did get a bit of grief because if you're a dancer, you're automatically labeled got to be gay, and that's not so. I mean, a lot of dancers are, of course, they are. Um, but I felt like I was an ambassador sometimes to say, look, not everybody is limp-wristed.
Mm,
Okay,
What did your dad
so.
do?
My dad was in finances. He was also a justice of the peace for a while. And I was born in Canberra, the capital city, and he was working in the government, but not elected. He was in the printing department, and I don't know what the circumstances was, but we moved back to Melbourne, where he was from. But my dad was a very interesting man. I wasn't that close to him. I think as a kid growing up, I loved my mother, absolutely adored mum. She was beautiful and just sweet. And I used to think, why is this old man in love with my mother when I'm in love with her? But he was an interesting man, very strict. But to his credit, I mean, he was from that generation. There was no hugging or touching, or I remember very clearly. Um, I don't know what age I was, but I remember the situation. I used to, my mum and dad would say, it's time to go to bed now. Go and kiss your dad and go to bed. Well, I would kiss him on the forehead and I say, "Good night, Dad." And then suddenly one day he said, "Oh, you don't have to kiss me anymore. You can shake my hand." And I didn't at that moment think about it, but I realized there was that separation of I can't be affectionate anymore. It's like the masculine shake the hand, bros.
Because you were becoming a man
Well, yeah, I was like
physically, if not.
physically, yeah, sure.
But
So
but there's something very touching about him giving you kind of a blessing in as much as he didn't say, "Don't you dare be a dancer." You need to get a. He basically gave you permission to be you.
he did exactly that. And as far as I know, his mother, who I never met, she died before I was born. She was an operetta singer in Melbourne. Her name was Nellie Thompson. And, she was quite successful, I think. And so he was brought up backstage in a sense, although he was never in the theater. I don't know much about his dad. He never talked about it. I think it was a bit of a, as we say in Australia, a bludger. Do you know that expression? It's like a, bludger. Uh, uh, you know, not a good man. Let's put it that way.
Bit
So
brutal.
a bit of a brute, I think I would say that. But I think it affected my dad too, because my father had a very strong stutter or stammer, and that affected him. I think it affected his health. I know that so much, but he loved literature. When I was a kid, he would give me like the works of Shakespeare and he was and George Bernard Shaw. This is even before I went into the theater. So I don't come from a theatrical family, other than my grandmother apparently, was a singer.
Mm.
But I'm the only one in the family that went into the performing arts.
I'm just reflecting on, you and I, between us, you especially have met an awful lot of men who didn't get anything of that kind from their fathers. Who were belted and
Yeah,
either physically or emotionally told to get on and conform and be normal or follow the toe the line.
right,
So I think
right.
it's wonderful because you've ended up. I mean, we'll come back to this obviously, but you've ended up being a mentor and being tremendously involved in a kind of education for men that many of us believe is sorely missing from the world, and that if possible, it would be good to reintroduce on a more widespread basis. But you've been very involved in that, and I think it's so interesting that you've come through into a leader role in that world, and it couldn't be more natural to you, really.
Correct. Interestingly enough, when I did the warrior training, I I really embraced it. I didn't particularly like being around men, particularly, sort of macho sort of guys. It's more, I like being with women. I would hang out with people that were interested in the arts and culture, I guess you'd say. But when I went to the warrior training, I really thought, wow, men are great, and they're we have wounds and all that stuff, and I just embraced it and got into the leadership. And I think why I was successful is, I mean, I'm theatrical, for God, and you are too. So my brand of like leadership was like I got the words, I got the play, and I got lighting, and let's do it. Put on a show in a
Mhm.
sense. It's not show business, but I was a performer in a sense, and I enjoyed doing that. But I think being involved with MKP for 30 years, I'm retired from it now. I've been retired 4 years now. That has been the highlight of my life.
Uh-huh. That's
Really. I mean, it's a connection. I loved coming to, I was on the first training in the UK,
Mhm.
and I had certainly helped the French. I love the French guys, and I had a smattering of French because in the ballet world, the language of dance is French. All the steps are French. So you learn French, not particularly conversational French too much. So I always enjoyed the French culture, and I'm a bit of a Francophile. But so when I go to France and the UK, I love the connection of the cultures because the only difference was we had an accent.
Mhm.
Our hearts were the same, our ambitions were the same, the wounds were very similar. So I really enjoyed, and I've had wonderful, wonderful friends through the connection of MKP.
Well, there'll be people watching who don't know what those initials stand for. So they stand for the Mankind Project. But I'll
That's
put
correct.
I'll put a link below in the description, a website link for MKP, because there may be people who are curious, and we're going to talk about it a bit more as we go. But it's
Right.
fascinating that I mean, just briefly, the Mankind Project is a global organization that I've spent some time being involved with, not so much now, but Les became a leader in that organization. It's a volunteer organization. It's not for profit. And essentially, over the last 30 years, it has established through a particular workshop called the Warrior Weekend, it has established a form of rites of passage for men of all ages, of all backgrounds, all sexualities. A workshop that many men, probably nearly 100,000 by now, I would have thought, if not more, have been through around the world on 5 continents, right?
Right,
So
yeah.
it really is a global phenomenon, and as I say, we'll come back to it because we want to talk about it. But I want to just keep tracking you a bit through your amazing career as a performer and as somebody involved in entertainment and TV particularly. So you ended up you did some ballet, you did a show in Melbourne, but then you ended up going to Paris on a sort of whim, and you ended up in sort of radical cabaret and
Right. Well, once when I left My Fair Lady, I joined the Australian Ballet, which was started up 60 years ago. They had their anniversary last year, and I was a good dancer, but I wasn't great. I was okay. I think I sort of got away because I was a late student. I didn't take it up until I was 18, 17 and a half, and it's pretty late.
Mhm.
But I got by because of my height and looks, and I was a man, you know.
Mm.
So, but when I left, and I did a musical comedy in Australia called The Sentimental Bloke, had a nice little role in that. So my idea was to go and study and join a European company in the dance world. So I was on my way to London, and on the way I stopped in Paris. I had an introduction to Madame Bluebell, this British woman that ran the girls at the Lido. So I get there in Paris on Saturday, and I called, and she said, "Oh, you're a dancer." I said, "Yeah." So you a singer? "Yeah, I can sing." Would you like to come and see the show tomorrow night? So I went Sunday night to the second show at the Lido on Champs-Élysées, and at first time I've ever seen naked ladies with plumes, and I thought, "Oh my God, this is incredible!" I loved it. You know, it was very foreign to me. And they said, would you be interested in auditioning for us?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'll do that." So I came the next morning. They gave me a few steps, very simple, and a song to sing, "Ça c'est Paris," or whatever. And they whispered, "Can you start tomorrow?" And I said, "What?" So I called my friends in London that were trying to work as dancers. He was a choreographer. And I said, "What's happening in London?" "Oh, there's no work. It's pretty bad." And I said, "Well, I've got this job. I'm working in the Lido." And they said, their idea was, "Oh my God, he's gone to the dogs. He's working in cabaret, you know." So an interesting story about that. When you're talking about sexuality, there was a beautiful girl that worked as a showgirl in the show Maud, her name was. She did the nude double for Brigitte Bardot in movies.
Wow.
Gorgeous. Anyway, we had a relationship, and she was 18, I think. I was like that time 22, 23, and we were sort of shacked up in a her manager's apartment. He found out about me and wanted to get me fired because he always wanted to get into her pants, you know. So so he threw us out of his apartment. So we took over. We went to a hotel room on the West Bank in Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and there was a knock on the door, and it was a prefect of police, and they wanted to see my card and see her card, and it'd been set up to get me arrested. And what are you doing with a girl that's underage? Because apparently you cannot cohabit with somebody under, I don't know, maybe 21. She was younger. So I was taken to jail, and I'm thinking, I'm too pretty to go to jail, for God's sake. So anyway, long story short, Madame Bluebell's daughter, Patrick, bailed me out. There was a little fine or something they paid. And when I went back to work that night, she said, She said, I thought you were enchanted. And I said, well, yeah, I'm happy to be here. Enchanted, she means gay. And I said, yeah, yeah, I'm enchanted. I'm happy to work. And she said, I don't like the boys cohabiting with my girls. But anyway, they let me, that was a little story about working with the Lido. So did that show. The show was finishing, and a new show was going to be produced at the Lido. The American choreographer then said, "We're going to take the show to L.A. Excuse me, Las Vegas, to the Stardust Hotel." And I was the only male they took. And they took like three or four girls to bring to the U.S. I didn't particularly want to come to the U.S. I didn't interest. I was more interested in Europe, the culture of Europe, you know. So I came to work in Vegas, and it was interesting, but I didn't quite fit anyway. But I left that show, and then I joined Hello Dolly with Betty Grable, and
Oh,
went on the road with that.
Betty.
Ended up in New York. We played. My contract was ending, but at that time, Matthew, I had the opportunity to go and study with Sanford Meisner.
Right.
Some of the viewers and listeners may know he was a great teacher, sort of methody, I guess, in a sense, Stanislavski. But he said to me, he said, I think you'd be better off working in film than trying to work on the stage in New York. So they arranged for me to come out to 20th Century Fox. And I did an audition, and they put me under contract for 6 weeks. I was in heaven, $195 a week, learning, how to be a film actor, which actually I didn't really learn much at all. I'd go to fencing classes and dancing classes, and the one thing I did get out of it was that I had to learn to lose my accent. You know, I went to a teacher. He's quite well known. I can't remember his name offhand, but he said we have to get rid of your bombastic T's. So he gave me an example. Americans, I often say to Americans, how do you pronounce Latter? And they say ladder. How do you pronounce Ladder? Ladder. There's no difference. So you and I would say latter and ladder. So I learned to get rid of my bombastic T's.
That's very Henry
So,
Higgins.
yeah, right, exactly. So, uh, so mostly when I did work in film, I played Brits. British. I did a movie called Raid on Rommel. Richard Burton. I was a day player. I had like a couple of lines saying Rommel's troops are here and we'll move them there or something or other, some silly thing. Anyway, but I did eventually get a job as an American cop on Mannix, and I felt pretty good. I got away with it. I played a cop in an American cop, but I at that time I was engaged and. Very hard to work as an actor. And I was already working as a production assistant because my manager, who was Betty Grable's manager, he managed the director of Hollywood Squares, it's a famous show. So from there, I just worked in PA and game shows, and then eventually on the Dinah Shore show. And then I ended up with the Merv Griffin show, which was a very prestigious talk show.
But this is an incredible. I mean, I know it took a few years, but
Oh yeah,
for being a production assistant, you ended up being the producer of one of the biggest talk shows on American network television.
I was co-producer
And
with him.
and you told me earlier on an email that you may have been the last person to speak to Orson Welles.
Right, I
Like,
was. I'm pretty sure I was. Merv's
he was a
favorite.
guest that night.
Yeah, Merv. On our very last show, the show was going off the air, and he wanted Orson for the whole show. So Orson came and did the show, and he was like huge at the time.
Well,
He
Merv was
was
retiring.
Merv show was retiring, yes. And so once the show was over, I always called him Mr. Wells, and I put him in his car and shook his hand. I said, "Good night, Mr. Wells, and be well," whatever. And he went home and had a heart attack. But I'll tell you a story about Mr. Wells. He would love to come. He loved coming on the show and talked about not so much his career. He could talk about anything. And he wanted to do magic shows, magic tricks. So he called in. He said, "You have a spot for me? I've got this new trick I'd like to do." And I'd say, "Yeah." He said, "Well, I don't do pre-interviews, but one has to eat. Why don't we have lunch?" So I go up to his house, and we go in his limo down to Le Restaurant down on Melrose Avenue. And of course, he's sitting at the table, and it was the time of all the nouvelle cuisine, little carrot this big and little cod like it. He had like 3 or 4 plates. He was so big. So people are coming over and talking and asking and going on. So getting back in the car to come back to his home, he said to his driver, "George, stop at Marie Callender's." Marie Callender's is a pie shop, like cheesecakes and pie shops, and he bought like 4 boxes of pies. And I'm sitting in the back, and we'd already had lunch, and he opened up and he said, "Would you like some chocolate cake?" And I'm thinking,
Wow.
that's why he was 400 pounds. So a little story about Orson.
Yeah.
I never called him Orson, Mr. Wells.
I watched the.
But pride and joy, I did get to meet Sir Laurence Olivier.
Oh, we have that in common too.
You have that in common. His son, what's his son's name that went to UCLA? You worked with
Richard. Richard.
Richard. He had come into town to LA for his graduation at UCLA, but he was also promoting his book, and and he called up and said, "I understand your show is very good to help people buy books and promote books." And I said, "Yes, we are." And I went to Merv and I said, "Laurence Olivier wants to do the show." And he said, well, let's bring him in right away, tomorrow. So we cleared the whole deck and he came, and he was extraordinary. Came in, shook hands with everybody. Unlike most celebrities that come to his show, they come in, they go into the room, then they come out on stage. He was completely, came out and wanted to talk to the audience. He was absolutely charming. So that was one of the highlights to meet Laurence Olivier.
And he must have been, if it's the book I'm thinking of, Confessions of an Actor, he would have been nearly 80 then.
I think so. He talked a lot about Marilyn Monroe. She's a naughty girl. She was always late, and could never learn her lines. And he was going on about Marilyn Monroe.
I was in, apart from the fact that I worked with Richard for a few years, I was in the same year at acting school with one of Sir Lawrence's daughters, Tamsin, who's a lovely, lovely person. And, so I was 20 and, we started to kind of hang out, a little gang of us. And one day she said, "Would you like to come to Sunday lunch? Here's the address." And I rocked up at their place in Sussex, and, I was 20. And the table was Maggie Smith, Robert Steve. I mean, it was just, and then I was invited on a family holiday in the second term. So I actually spent a week with Sir Lawrence on the Italian island of Ischia, a gang of us. He obviously caught my drift because he used to take me to one side and say, "Would you like another drink?" Because we were all supposed to let him go to bed at sort of 7:30 p.m. because he wasn't well. And he would grab me by the elbow and steer me towards the booze and say, "Let's have another drink." So I got into terrible trouble. But can you imagine being 20 years old and spending a week with Sir Laurence Olivier? I mean, I just there are no photographs, but it was the most wonderful, beautiful, because it was the same sort of time that you're talking about, where he was just heaven to be with, to be around. He wanted to talk and tell stories and just be with people, and because he was so, chaperoned and marshaled and told he had to mustn't do this and don't eat that and go to bed and don't drink this, and he just loved to be with people.
Yeah,
So
fascinating.
yeah, you made me think about that. So this is I just think this is wonderful that you ended up um, at the very heart of kind of Hollywood TV, and but then you had a whole new life to live. How so? What was your? I mean, this is. I'm not asking you to remember anything, but what did you? Were you comfortable with your masculinity? Were you comfortable around these in a world of men who could behave badly and unpleasantly, and we all know celebrities can be pretty tricky. Where were you coming from at that point in yourself as a man? You were a dad, you were a husband, um,
Yeah.
and you were a leader because you were a producer in big time TV.
Well, I think earlier I was rather, I wouldn't say aggressive, but I was very defensive about my sexuality because, I'm labeled as if you're a dancer, you got to be gay. And I always felt like I had to defend myself, which I did. But then I softened over the years and felt that I didn't need to do that anymore. And particularly working doing the Mankind Project, where men come through with, all different types of the sexuality and life experiences. I think I was okay to just accept what is and just support them, in many ways.
Did you have mentors in your life? Who was an important older man to you when you were in your 30s and 40s?
I didn't really have anybody in that sense. I had more mentors when I got into Mankind Project, because you're required to have a mentor when you're in leadership. But I didn't really have any one person to. Uh, in my earlier life in the performing arts, my teacher, his name is Rex Reed. He got an OBE or something. He was a choreographer. He created a ballet for the opening for the Australian ballet called the Melbourne Cup. And I had a really nice role in that, played the governor. And he was a big influence on me, and particularly the woman that ran his studio. Her name was Natasha, Russian, actually Georgian Russian, and she's like very, very Russian. She was like, she was about 4'8", very tiny, with these little funny little shoes. And she'd get on the tram to come into Melbourne, and there'd be some person on the tram with a child, and she'd talk to the woman. She said, "Oh, your child is so beautiful. He or she must dance. Here's my card." She was one of that type. But her cousin was Vera Stravinsky, married to Igor Stravinsky. So I was influenced by a lot of people from the Europe that were in the performing arts, and particularly in the ballet world. So, mentorship, it's an interesting question. I didn't have a man mentor until later on in life. Perhaps I needed it, but yeah, I didn't have it.
But did you have a sense of seeking something, of looking for something? I mean, to be in the world, my dad was a big guy in TV, and he never wasted much of his time having a spiritual quest, or, I mean, he was obviously deeply connected to wonderful things like music and opera and so on. So there's a great spirituality in music. But how the hell did you veer towards rites of passage for men and kind of I mean, there is a kind of ritual aspect to the Warrior Weekend and Mankind Project. Were you looking for something?
I think, yes, I think always I'd been a seeker. I studied religions, uh, and I ended up, I'm an atheist, and I think, I mean, I'm a big fan of Christopher Hitchens. His great book, God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything, was very influential, but that book came out, I think, in 2000, something like that. But before that, I was always going to seminars and retreats, and because I didn't just working in showbiz wasn't fulfilling enough for me. I always wanted more, and the spiritual aspect of how do I fit in? Who am I? How do I fit into this universe? Where do I fit? You know? And so I was part of a group, a salon in Beverly Hills, and we used to have writers that would come, and we'd pay them to be our guest for the night. And me working in that industry, I had a lot of contact with writers that would want to do the show. That's why I was part of the group. They were very, very wealthy people. And of course, I'm not a wealthy person. But there was a man by the name of Ralph Blum, and he wrote a book on the runes. You know, the runes, the book of runes.
Yes.
And I got to know him fairly well. And then out of the blue, one of the man that was part of our group was in my office. He shared an office space. He was a billionaire, but he liked being around theatrical types. So his name was Richard, and he was very, very grumpy sort of guy. And he came in one Monday morning, and he was like transformed. And I said, Richard, what's happened to you? He said, I did this training. It's a men's training. And I'm thinking, you have to train to be a man now? That's right. So, and I said, what is it about? He said, you'll love it. Just do it.
Uh,
And he said,
magic.
Ralph, yeah, and Ralph was there with me. And I called Ralph and I said, Ralph, what's this training you and Richard did? Oh, he said it was great. And I said, what's the accommodations like? Oh, adequate. What's the food like? Adequate. He said, just go and do it. So funnily enough, when I did sign up, the day to drive down to San Diego, I had a big meeting a pitch meeting actually at CBS, and I'm all dressed in my Gucci and silks and shoes and shit, and I drive down there and I get out of my car and I see all these guys walking around in jeans and boots, and I'm thinking something tells me I better change my clothes, which I did. So it was revolutionary for me to get into a container of masculine energy to wake me up. The New Warrior Training Adventure we call an initiation. Initiation, the definition of initiare, Latin word, means to start something. To start something. Start what? To be awake. To be awake to life. So that appealed to me. And each time I would go on a training, I'd say, this is an initiation. Initiation means this is the start of something for you to take on. Your life can be your quest, your warrior's journey to wake up to be a good man.
mm.
You know? So I'd always been, the answer, long response to your question,
That's good. But
I've always been a seeker. I've always looked for.
why do you think? I mean, we know there's a history to how the Mankind Project came about, the individuals who got together and so on. But it's interesting that it's a warrior. It's we're talking about kind of broadly about archetypes of masculinity, which are not necessarily gender specific, of course. But were you attracted by the word warrior, or?
Not particularly. Initially the three founding fathers, there are two that still alive at the moment. They wanted to call it the Peaceful Warrior. There was a book, I think.
Oh yeah, Dan Millman. Yeah.
Millman, right, thank you. Dan Millman. And that was trademarked, and he wouldn't give that. So we couldn't call it the Peaceful Warrior Training. So they called it the New Warrior Training. And it was something that it was a marketing thing that we learned to say, look, we're not warriors in the sense that we're destruction and at war. We are guardians. We are the masculine energy who are the nurturers and the guardians of men. So that was my definition of how I wanted to think about being involved,
That is still such a rare application of the word warrior.
isn't it? Yeah, particularly now. Particularly now.
I remember there's someone, maybe Michael Mead, but some wise person used that phrase, never give a sword to a man who can't dance.
I love that.
It's so
Me
true
being a
about you,
dancer,
isn't
of
it? Yeah.
course. Yeah.
But this
Yeah.
idea that the archetypal warrior is in fact someone who understands the power of violence and will do almost anything to avoid using it, right?
Right. Right. Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, in other words, to use that power for healing and for education and creating connection and community rather than to cut people to shreds.
Well, in the New Warrior Training Adventure, Mankind Project's weekend, they call it the weekend, where the initiates would come. Uh, Normally, there are about 32 men that sign up. More can be more, and there's a bigger staff. As you've staffed several times. There are more on staff than there are participants, and we go a day earlier.
Mm,
So the initiation in our point of view is like it has three steps. There's there's a separation, there's a descent into the ordeal, and then there's the ascent back into your life.
mm,
Well, what's the ordeal? The ordeal is confronting your shadow, that part in each of us that we hide, repress, and deny.
mm,
And boy, I'm still doing that work with my shadow. Where's my shadow?
mm.
How's it turn up in my life? So it's a very powerful weekend.
And you used the word container 5 minutes ago, but I guess what we're saying is that if you're talking about, I mean, I've led many workshops in my time, but mostly to do with actors. But anyone who leads a workshop needs to be able to create a sense of the space being contained and held. That's the job of the leader. But we're talking about a group of approximately 30 men who might come to one of these weekends to do the training. And around them are maybe 50 or more other men who have already done that training, who are literally creating a safe, protected space for the event to take place in.
Yes,
So that's what we
exactly.
mean by a container. We're talking about something that literally can hold the space.
A container of energy, of
Mm.
masculine energy, of
Yeah,
men.
because if you
Yes.
get 75 men together, there's going to be some energy, correct?
You better believe it, mate.
Yeah. And that is a very frightening thing for a lot of men, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I particularly wasn't afraid when my first went to the training. There was a part of the weekend where they pose a question, why are you here? Well, I didn't really have an answer. I mean, couldn't give an articulate answer of many reasons. I showed up because I thought there may be something for me, but I didn't quite know exactly why I was there. What I didn't have no idea of what a shadow was. You
Uh-huh.
know, that dark part of us that can be destructive and that wants to defeat us. But you're right. The container of energy, I always felt that was wonderful. It
Mm.
was wonderful to see the transformation. And you mentioned there are more men on staff. They're volunteers. They
Mm.
come back and they want their brothers to get it. They want their fathers, their son, and their their workmates to get it.
Right.
Get it. Waking up to be a good man.
But that's so interesting that you said that actually once you got there, you were like, well, I don't really know why I'm here. Because actually you've already said that you were a seeker. You self-identified as someone who was kind of on a quest to get some meaning. TV and your very successful career wasn't giving you necessarily all the richness of meaning that you wanted in your life. So you were on that pathway. What's my next challenge? Where can I get a challenge from? Where am I going to get a piece of information about myself that I don't already have? What are some other? I mean, we're not doing an infomercial for the Mankind Project here, but I think it's so interesting. I mean, I've been going to AA for 28 years because I needed to stop drinking. But that's pretty much everyone who goes to a 12-step fellowship is there because they need to stop doing something. But what are some of the other reasons somebody might go to a warrior weekend?
I think to look at their relationships, if they're married or single or whatever. I think I think there are lots of reasons why men would go to a weekend. They're usually sort of not cajoled, but they're invited by other men and they see a difference in them. They say, "Oh, I want what you have. I want your accessibility. I want your aliveness that you
Uh-huh.
have." So I think
Mhm.
there are lots of reasons why men go to a warrior weekend.
And specifically, maybe you're talking about accessibility. Maybe that's also for some to do with an access to feeling,
Oh yeah.
to an articulacy about emotion, which men are very challenged by sometimes.
Right. Well, you mentioned the word feeling. We I mean, we sound like we're doing an infomercial here, but we do get men to get in touch with their feelings on the weekend because a lot of men are blocked. They've got this sort of um, barrier, this armor around their heart where they think it's sort of soft and feminine or sissy to express emotion, particularly to another man, you know. And what I liked about the training, what I got from it, I have full permission to be me and the emotions that come up, you know. I would say that in my youth, I was a sensitive man in some ways. I cried easily or and felt a lot of joy, ecstatic joy. I was very emotional in that regard. I was never contained or suppressed by anything other than society where you're not supposed to do it, like in public. But I think it's very, very freeing for men to be in a container again of other men and energy and to be honest and authentic with your feelings.
Right, right.
Mm,
I mean, people talk about getting men getting in touch with their feelings, but that's
yeah,
easily said. But actually, if you're not in touch with the feelings, it can be unbelievably daunting to try and figure out, well, what's wrong with me.
right, exactly. Yeah. So,
Hmm.
mm,
Uh, the I mean, I was a great reader of one of the great Jungians, Robert Moore, who
yeah,
famously, he wrote an extraordinary piece, really where he had a vision for. I mean, we're just lucky that something like this exists, and there are other forms of initiation that pop up all over the place. Initiation is something that from my studies, that existed probably globally for millennia until maybe the last 3, 4, 500 years with the scientific revolution and globalization and so on has slowly erased it. It's still there in pockets in one or two, maybe in one or two places in Africa or in the Amazon or in the Inuits, maybe even in Aboriginal Australians. But it is very rare now that young men are put through any kind of training as to how to deploy their masculinity once it comes on stream in that kind of incredible tsunami of energy at puberty.
yeah.
And this is what MK. I repeat, I am no longer involved with MKP, and Les is retired. But we've both been and a lot of other men that we both know have been very helped and challenged by this workshop. And God knows what Robert Moore was saying was there has never been a greater time for a group of men to get together and take responsibility for trying to reintroduce rites of passage into the culture.
Well, speaking of Robert Moore, I met him and he came to a leadership. He'd gone through the training. Had he gone through the training then? I'm not sure if he had, but he was a speaker at one of the leadership trainings in, I think it was in Chicago. And he talked about John the Baptist saying that, "Are you the one?" to Christ. And he said to us as men, "Are you the one that I've been looking for?"
Mm.
And we took that on as like a wow, what a, what a something to go for. What a challenge. He wrote a seminal book called King, Lover, Warrior, Magician, with four archetypal energies that men have and women have too. No, he was a brilliant man in his own way. I didn't know him personally very well, but got to sit in a circle with him. It was
Mm.
great.
Another man who had a great influence on all this was Robert Bly,
Yeah.
the American mythologist, poet, and activist. I never forget turning the TV on in about 19. I don't know. I'd just become a dad, so it was about 1990. I turned on the late night news show on BBC Newsnight, and there was this guy, this huge head of white hair like Moses, wearing this beautiful brocaded waistcoat, and he was saying to the host, "You're not listening to me." Um, I, I was absolutely seized by it. I had to know who this voice belonged to, so I went to the TV, and there was this guy, Robert Bly, who had just published a book called Iron John, and he was saying, that we are going to have a problem. This is 35 years ago. That we are going to have a major problem any day now, with gangs of young men wandering around with weapons and absolutely no fathering, no mentoring, cut loose from the culture, absolutely demonized by everybody, especially the media. And, these guys are not going to kind of be quiet in life. They're going to burn down the village just to feel
Right.
the heat. And
Yeah, he was prescient. Yeah.
that was I mean, it was hearing that voice on TV that made me I went and bought Iron John for a start. It's an incredible book for people if you haven't read it. But he also had a great influence on this workshop that we're talking about, did he not?
Yeah, he did. I got to present his 80th birthday cake. I
Ah,
was at the men's conference in Florida, and there were a lot different groups there, and he was a speaker along with who was the Sam Keen and some other John Lee, men in the men's so-called men's movement.
mm,
And so when I presented the cake to him, I said, Robert, that your seminal book, Iron John, is required reading. Parts of it is required reading for men to come to the training. And at that time, there was like maybe 60,000 men had gone through the training. And I said, so there are 60,000 men that have read your book. And he cried.
oh,
It was beautiful. It
mm,
was he was so beautiful, such a loving grandpa. He was
yeah.
like a grandfather. And I know you had a big influence from him.
Oh, I did, and I'm extremely proud of being one of the producers of a beautiful documentary that I think you watched,
I did.
called Robert Bly: A Thousand Years of Joy.
Bravo, bravo.
If viewers haven't seen that documentary, I think you can get it on demand on Vimeo, and you can certainly buy a DVD of it. Um, and before I did that workshop with MKP, I did other rites of passage type events in the UK with Bly and Robert Moore and Michael Mead and Malidoma Somé and Martin Prechtel, all these guys. That Richard Olivier, in fact, God bless him, was responsible for bringing these people to the UK. And there were about 100 of us in the room. It was a flowering of yeah, it was called the men's movement, and it was kind of cliched as that. And journalists would come along from the Daily Mail and take the piss, and
Yeah, yeah.
and I have to say it didn't sustain. It couldn't, for some reason, it couldn't sustain. Quite a few young men now say to me, why aren't we doing those events nowadays? Why aren't these things happening? And it was a kind of ecstatic moment of bringing together of psychology, poetry, rites of passage, men's ritual, fairy tales, mythology. I mean, it was just beautiful. But what Bly used to do with there'd be like for 4 days and nights, 100 men would be together doing stories and poetry and so on. And then at the end of that, Bly would say goodbye to each man. And I had never, at that point in my life, really, no older man had ever looked right into me, and Bly did it for each of the men there, and I understand now what he was doing. I mean, this is at the heart of any kind of men's work, men's movement, rites of passage. He basically blessed all these men. He
Yeah.
he he deliberately, consciously held the role of an elder, of a grandfather, of a wise older figure who you weren't related to, wasn't your dad, didn't know you. But he looked right into me and he said, "I like you. You're intelligent."
Yeah.
It's the most wonderful. I never, you cannot forget these moments where you feel finally blessed,
Seen.
seen
Seen.
and blessed. Seen is correct.
Right.
So, that's a very powerful thing. And what I
Yeah.
remember, whether it was Robert Moore or somebody, but some guy said we need to start making elders younger, which I was quite interested in, because Robert Moore always said that elders don't really come on stream. The energy isn't really there in a man to be an elder until he's maybe 55. What do you think about that?
I think that's right. I used to think, oh, I don't want to be an old guy and one of those old men. I'm young and youthful and all that sort of stuff. So I resisted being an elder, but I don't know what that was about resisting. It was probably just because of my vanity. I didn't want to be an old bloke. But it's true. I think that is particularly missing in our society now, that we have a lot of lost men that sit in front of a screen in their mother's basement with no job, feeling lost. They're incels in many ways, and there's not that eldership. There's not that grandfather energy to say, "Come on, go out there and do something with your life. Be a man. Be a warrior. Take on challenges. Be a father. Be a good man on the planet." That's not miss. That seems to be missing now.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
Robert famously said, are you to the Mankind Project? Are you the ones who can turn this into?
Yeah.
I did a few years, not like you. You did 20 years of service. I did a few years, and for one reason or another, my life went in another direction. But do you think that's hopelessly idealistic, that we can turn the state of the world around, and starting? I mean, the slogan was "one man at a time," wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that is that hopelessly beyond us now, or as we enter the age of Aquarius, is now the time more than ever? Maybe.
It takes a lot of men. I mean, you think one man at a time. My God, it'll take forever to wake people up. Um, I think the thing that people don't realize about with again Mankind Project is that it's a seminal experience. You and I have that shared experience, and we seem to think, well, you need to hang around and be with us forever. No, it's a threshold experience where you open up your eyes and then you can choose to go and do other things that I did. You mentioned that you've been involved with AA. My other daughter, was a heroin addict, and I got a lot of help and comfort by going to Naranon meetings. I did go to what's the other one? There's the Al-Anon. Al-Anon, I got some help from, but particularly Naranon. And once the message I got from that is, I didn't cause her addiction. I can't change it, and I can't cure it. That was the big lesson I got from it.
Mm.
She, I can love her and nurture her if she wants to be that, wants to accept that, but she has chosen this life. I didn't. I can't change it, and I can't cure it. That was a big message of sitting in circle with parents that are in pain, with what a family member who has succumbed to a life of drugs.
So Nar-Anon is for the families of drug addicts.
Right.
It's a fellow a 12-step
Not Narcotics Anonymous.
Alcoholics
That's what
Anonymous.
Nar-Anon means, Narcotics Anonymous.
But are you talking about like a family fellowship that's associated
No,
to?
it's like AA. Anybody can turn up. You
Okay.
know, it's structured exactly like AA.
But Al-Anon is a secondary fellowship
Right.
associated to Alcoholics Anonymous for
Those circles, I think, are enormously valuable. And it's interesting when I watch a lot of shows these days, particularly like the British crime shows. There's one I'm watching at the moment, and it's called Patience. So this woman who is autistic, and she goes to an autistic anonymous sort of group setting, and I thought it was wonderful to have that as a storyline where she gets help from others. Those self-help groups are wonderful.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Well, they've saved my bacon for a long time because
good on you. Good on you.
I have my own challenges with drugs and alcohol.
Yeah.
Um, but one thing that a word we haven't mentioned, which I think comes up for this. I mean, certainly Robert Bly and others were instrumental in introducing me to the idea that grief is something that men have kind of been brought up to disown in themselves, but that actually grief is one of the most noble aspects of masculinity. Do you know what I mean by that?
I do. I do. Yeah, we're told not to show emotions as little boys. Grin and bear it, stiff upper lip, the Brits say. And it's very damaging. I remember a training in Australia. There was a man that came through on the training, and his work, so-called work, was about the loss of his daughter and how he had made a coffin for her to be buried in. And he was still, grieving, and his wife kept saying, "Oh, get over it now, get over it. She's gone, and you must get on with your life." That's not the message you say to somebody who's grieving. It's not the message to say to somebody, but that's what society says. Get over it and get on with your life, and you know, it's no big thing. Grief is very, very important thing to experience
Mm,
because it's about loss of something. You've lost a part of your life, lost a valuable experience with somebody or some things that are meaningful to one. And one shouldn't just brush it aside and say, okay, get on to the next thing.
mm. Well,
But I'm glad you bring that up. Grief is very important for us to fully experience. When I did the S training, that was really the start of my workshop life. EST was created by Werner Erhard.
est.
Yeah, EST.
What was that? What was that like?
Oh, it was brutal. Brutal in the fact that like 300 people sitting in a room for 2 weekends on a break in the week. You couldn't go to the bathroom. They were very, very structured, but it was a wake up. And but Werner, I got to know a fair bit, and I actually put him on the Merv Griffin show. And he used to say, if you fully experience something, it disappears the energy or it deflates the energy in your life. And
Mhm.
that's so true. So if you fully experience your grief, it will take the so-called negative energy out of your life.
Mhm. Is that, do you,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm quickly scanning my own. Is that true?
I think so. Well, when you look at it, if you're in a car accident and you're suddenly in a car accident and you're in the hospital, that's an affront to your whole being. Your life, who you are, your survival. It's existential. You remember that. But if you knock your elbow into walking through a door and, oh, I've hurt my elbow, and you fully experience it, it goes away. You don't have any trauma about that.
Mhm.
So, I don't know if I explained that well, but
Did you did you ever come across James Hillman in your
I
travels?
didn't. No, I didn't.
I mean, I think I did one or two workshops with him, but he did write a wonderful, very funny book. Co-wrote a very funny book called "We've Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World's Getting Worse." It's I mean it's 30 years old, that book now, but it's still full of, because he was a guy who'd been through the whole analytical psychological world and come out the other end and said, wait a minute, we don't know what we're talking about. We're encouraging people to hang on to their trauma and their grief. This endless recycling of, oh, my mum and dad didn't take me fishing, and the whole kind of victim mentality
Yeah.
of the therapeutic model. And what Hillman introduced me to was in a fantastic book called The Soul's Code, was the idea that whatever challenges I've faced, it's no use blaming someone else. I need to actually at least work with the idea, even if it's only a metaphor, that I somehow chose this. I
Yeah.
chose these parents. I chose these circumstances to be born into. Of course, I can't remember it because it was a deal I made before I was in this body. But I mean, that's the metaphor, if you like. Whether some people think it's literally true, but I think there's a lot of good energy in playing with these ideas that um, I may actually need to fall in love with my own fate instead of constantly saying it's not fair.
Well, the Stoics, there's a phrase they say, amor fati, means to love your fate, love your life, love what's been presented to you. I've been studying Stoicism now for maybe 10 years. I wouldn't call myself a full-blown Stoic, but I like the philosophy of it.
Uh-huh.
Particularly, I've got two groups, and we call it memento mori, with the Stoics would greet one another in the marketplace. The Stoa, that's the marketplace, Stoa, that's where the word Stoicism comes from. And they would greet one another, embrace, and whisper in their ear, Memento Mori.
Hmm.
Remember, you will die. This is it now. This is your life. Get on with it. I mean, they probably didn't do it as theatrical as I did, but that was the message. Memento mori. This is your one life, you know?
Wow, that's powerful.
It is. I mean, Stoicism is really becoming quite popular now. I follow a lot of people. There's a man in the US here called Ryan Holiday. He's got the Daily Stoic, and I grab at everything. I'm open to things, and I like his philosophy, his teachings, I should say.
Well,
Mm.
I can't believe you're 86. It's not possible, but I'm 63 now, so it must something's happening to both of us.
Looking good, mate.
Uh,
Looking good.
well, you can talk. I mean, Les, you are an absolute, shining example of thinking young, staying young, and being present in your body and in your life. Um,
Thank you.
I think we should probably get out early before we start repeating ourselves. But anything that you'd like to say in finishing about this whole subject of how we get on terms with our the existential crisis, and start being useful and make a difference in the world.
What a beautiful question. That is my challenge at the moment now. I'm 86. I do enjoy good health. I've got a few issues here and there. I'm doing chair yoga and walk. I did my walk this morning. My challenge now is how do I live out the rest of my life in gratitude and I yeah, it's a challenge. I know I'm going to die. So I guess my warrior journey now is to take care of my health and my relationships and be a good man and mentor and have great connections with people. And but it is a bit of a challenge to grow old, to aches and pains. And when you're a dancer, you don't talk about your injuries too much. You just get on with it. Every dancer has injuries. So, but I think, yeah, that's my challenge now is how do I live the rest of my days, feeling contentment. I came across a quote, if we may end with this. Um, Happiness is accepting my standard of living without envy. Isn't that a great quote?
It is. It's that's quite challenging because
Yeah, I don't know who said it, but boy, I'm quoting somebody else. But so, how do I live a balanced life? Maybe I shouldn't open up to a whole can of worms, but I am particularly struggling with the political situation in this country and
Mm.
around the world. So, how do I have a balanced life with not letting that affect every part of my life? To have a healthy balance by being knowing what's going on and not letting it affect me personally, where it diminishes my power and diminishes my spirituality and makes me cynical and old and grumpy.
Well, yeah, that is a challenge. Uh,
Yeah.
but two things. My response to that is something I'm really working on myself at the moment is trying to accept that if the picture looks dark at the moment, it's only that the light is being slightly occluded and it's still there. You can't have the dark without the light. You can't have the light without the dark. So whatever these people are doing, they either think they're right to do it or that they have the power to do it. That doesn't mean that the good and the light is it has been destroyed. It's still there. It's just maybe at the moment it's harder to see. And
Yes.
that's true of us individually. That whatever,
Right.
however I may feel, that I'm somehow failing, that or that I'm, not who as whatever as I should be. That there's still a lot of good there. I'm not in a position to judge accurately what's really going on. I mean, that's something I'm working on because I'm unemployed, and I think I'm special. So
Well, you are special. You just happen to be unemployed.
I'll take that.
Oh,
And the other thing that I wanted to say in closing was something that Michael Mead used to say at these gatherings. He said, it is important that when death finds you, it finds you alive.
isn't that great? That's great. I love
So,
it. Yeah.
listen, I wish you so much love and all the best. And I know you and I will stay in touch. But we'll share this recording, and maybe somebody will feel inspired just to read a poem or go on a workshop. Who knows? But Les, I love you. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, brother. Well, this is all about me. As a recovering narcissist, I liked it, but I want to know about you. So we'll continue that. I want to know about your journey.
All
I
right.
love you, man,
I
and
love
thank
you.
you. Give my love to your lovely wife, Nicola, and your two daughters.
I will. Bless you. Take care.
That's your friend.
Talk to you
Bye bye.
soon. All right.
Bye bye.
Bye, Les.